I communicate with you this evening a significant address, a speech to reach out to you and tell you of things that I observe across the landscape of global and national affairs. I've adopted a different means of communication in a different era of broadcasting, where it's known in some circles that the amount of television broadcasting that is delivered effectively through YouTube per day now exceeds the sum total of broadcasting entire worldwide through all the major classic studio networks through the entire 20th century per hour, my friends. Probably more than that now. Much more. That was, I think, a decade dated. You see, I've spent a long time in the technology world, but also in the worlds of national security, military affairs, and global defense, national security, and military defense. The news of the Hamas strike on southern Israel, by surprise, was an absolute shock of sorrow, just deep sorrow and horror at the gravity of the attack at a time of such potent forces afoot in global affairs already. These acts of just sadistic and vile terrorists who, in the worst of the use of that phrase, who barbarically slaughter innocent civilians and barrage with rockets unannounced and unforecast or not even thought about, was horrific to behold. And I saw so many years, decades of diligent work by state departments, one upon the other, and defense scenario planning efforts across all branches of our military, the Pentagon and beyond, and in every NATO country. Indeed, every country just about on the planet has an interest in what everybody has an interest in this case, religious conflict over shared holy lands, plural, which we best not defile. There is no excuse for that kind of barbaric, sadistic, murderous attack on the people of Israel. Everybody across the Middle East has been through enough over generations. When will I stop? Now, it struck me deeply because I've been thinking about Middle Eastern affairs ever since I took my own personal trip first to the Holy Land and to Jerusalem and stayed 6 weeks in the great land of Israel with almost daily visits to the old city to see the Jaffa Gate, Damascus Gate, the two gates that we frequented, me and my parents and my siblings, as my father was teaching on sabbatical at Hebrew University. Seeing the conjunction of civilizations that are vibrant in Israel is a remarkable thing to behold. The opportunity to walk down the cobblestone streets where the prophets of old that we all read about in churches or spiritual engagements that we have in our life, if we do, I did growing up, my Mormon Christian tradition. The weekly visit to the Sabbath, the Sunday noon service, or wherever it moved to, was always mandatory Firmage household, and that was a good thing. But to be there in 1982, when one of the sparking events of discord that is generations deep between the Israelis, particularly between the Jews and the Palestinian Muslims, arose in its genesis through the partitioning of those holy lands by the remnants of the British Empire, the United Kingdom, at the end of World War II. Great Britain had the responsibility, as one of the just allies, as a victor of that cataclysmic war, to partition the regions that they had reconquered at great cost of blood, sword, and every kind of weapon. Let us not repeat World War II ever again. What came out of it was an Israel created and carved out as a land of milk and honey, I suppose, to a population of human beings that had been so savaged, so brutally destroyed as nearly a race these many decades before. So to see families slaughtered in real time, and now over these devices live, it's a different thing, and it's a different kind of war. It's a war that should not be. The people responsible for those barbaric acts should be wiped from the face of this planet. But to those who feel like I do about such horrific crimes, what distinguishes us from those barbarians is a rule of law. It's a rule, actually, of decency. The commander-in-chief of the victor, the United States of America, of World War II in prime, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, who presided over our great nation for nearly 4 terms. But if I recall, the night before his untimely death to a stroke, it was the night before a completion of a speech that he was to give at the birth of the United Nations, which was just a few weeks later to be christened at Muir Woods, just north of San Francisco, a place that I visited many times to see that United Nations plaque on the red tree as the mark of the westward expansion. Harken memories. But in his great speech, he, and I paraphrase, basically implored the commander-in-chief of the primary victor with the Allies over Adolf Hitler, leader of the Allies, was commander-in-chief and president Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he said, above all, let us find ways different than dismembering each other's peoples, rather than putting innocent civilians in harm's way as the means of settling boundary differences, basically. Now, in the discussion to follow, I am presenting what I believe is a wise course of action to resolve this matter and in the process resolve two other most pressing matters, and hopefully more by such examples being dispatched properly. These endless geostrategic debates. The realpolitik that is reflected in the Council of Foreign Relations work and the work of the World Economic Forum, on whose board I sat for a couple of years, around 2000, the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica, and countless think tanks and institutes across the political spectrum, to name. But across that community, it's often viewed that ambitious things cannot be done, that incrementalism is the only answer, that we always have to cut something in half and make it less in each part by half than even half a whole. I think you get my drift. We can sometimes have wonderful ideas, new ideas that come to bear, and that is what I'm about to present to this trio of global conflict challenges, crises that we must face. Ukraine, and the war that Russia invoked. The Hamas have now invoked a war in our holiest of lands. All of us, as human beings, can think that first, citizenship second. And in that sense, in a conflict that does not need to happen in the Pacific, the peaceful ocean. And I hope that a new pact with China can be founded with the United States as its lead. And let's restore some decency to our global international order. We all count upon that to sleep at night and to raise happy families whose children have the opportunity to have what we have, and for the first time be inspired by its novelty and our Christmas tree. Those depend upon peace. Strength through peace, my friends. Thank you. May God bless you, your family, and may God bless the United States of America and all of her allies. Thank you. Enjoy this presentation. Towards a lasting peace in the Middle East, tackling extremism to the ground. October 18th, 2023. The conflict between Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hamas, is one of the most complex and long-lasting on the planet, with many historical, political, religious, and humanitarian factors involved. It is part of the larger Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which dates back to the early 20th century, with a history of biblical conflicts lingering long before, when Jewish and Arab nationalist movements emerged in the region competing for land, resources, and recognition. The conflict intensified after the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, by which was followed several wars and uprisings between Israel and its Arab neighbors, as well as the displacement and occupation of millions of Palestinians. I was personally witness to such periods when staying in Jerusalem in 1982, and later visiting Israel in 2000. The old city of Jerusalem is a wonder to behold, where all of the Abrahamic religious traditions share sites considered truly sacred ground. As a Mormon Christian, I remember so very well walking where Jesus once walked, in the town of Bethlehem, along the shores of the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee, and the banks of and along the Jordan River. I even scuba dived once off the coast of Eilat, just at the tip of the Red Sea, as Egypt meets Israel and Gaza. But most of all, I shall not forget walking upon the Mount of Olives through the gates of the old city where Jesus entered, and down cobblestone alleys amongst the Jewish, Arab, and Christian merchants, through to the Via Dolorosa, where he took his last steps, carrying his cross. Gaza is a small coastal enclave that borders Israel and Egypt. It has a population of about 2 million people, mostly Palestinians, who live under harsh conditions of poverty, unemployment, and isolation. Gaza is controlled by Hamas, a Palestinian Islamist militant group that emerged in the late 1980s. Hamas is considered a terrorist organization by many countries, including the United States, the European Union, and Israel, but also has political and social wings that provide services and governance to the population of Gaza. Hamas has repeatedly rejected the recognition of Israel as a state and has carried out numerous attacks against Israeli civilians and military targets. The conflict between Israel and Gaza has been marked by cycles of violence, principally between Israel and Hamas, and ceasefires with no lasting peace agreement in sight. The most recent escalation, prior to October 7th, occurred in May of 2021, when Hamas fired rockets at Israel in response to Israeli police raids and evictions in East Jerusalem, a disputed territory that both sides claim as their capital. Israel responded with airstrikes and artillery fire that targeted Hamas infrastructure and militants, but also killed hundreds of civilians and damaged thousands of buildings. The fighting lasted for 11 days and ended with a fragile truce brokered by Egypt. That was in 2021. Now we're in October of 23. My fellow citizens, there is no easy or definitive answer to how to achieve permanent peace in the Middle East, but there are some possible solutions that have been proposed or discussed by various parties. These proposals include a two-state solution. This is the most widely accepted and internationally endorsed solution, which aims to create an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, both alongside Israel, with mutually agreed borders and security arrangements. This would require Israel to end its occupation and settlement of Palestinian territories, and Hamas to recognize Israel's right to exist and renounce violence. Both sides would also have to resolve thorny issues such as the status of Jerusalem. I will return to that topic in a moment. Also resolve the rights of Palestinian refugees and the sharing of natural resources. Supporters of this solution, the two-state solution, argue that it would respect the national aspirations and self-determination of both peoples and ensure a democratic and Jewish state for Israel. Critics of this solution contend that it is no longer feasible or realistic given the facts on the ground, such as the expansion of Israeli settlements, the fragmentation of Palestinian territories, the division of Palestinian leadership, and the lack of trust and willingness to compromise between the parties. For the one-state solution, this is an alternative proposal that advocates for a single democratic state that encompasses Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip, with equal rights and citizenship for all its inhabitants, regardless of their ethnicity or religion. This would entail as its advocates forecast, the dissolution of Israel as a Jewish state, and the creation of a binational or multicultural state that reflects the diversity of its population. Supporters of this solution argue that it would end the occupation, discrimination, and violence that Palestinians face under Israeli rule, and uphold the principles of human rights and democracy for all. Critics of this one-state solution warn that it would undermine the Jewish character and identity of Israel and lead to more conflict and instability in the region, as neither side would accept or coexist peacefully with the other in a shared state. And then there's the status quo, or to do nothing, as we witness the start of a potential world war. This is not a solution, per se, to do nothing, but rather a description of the current situation, which involves ongoing military confrontation, political deadlock, diplomatic isolation, economic hardship for all parties involved, and human suffering for both sides. This scenario also entails no significant change in the existing power dynamics or territorial realities, and no serious attempt to negotiate or implement a lasting peace agreement. Supporters of status quo argue that it is preferable to make concessions or take risks that could jeopardize their security or interests. Critics of this scenario denounce it as unsustainable, as I do, and immoral, as it perpetuates the cycle of violence and oppression, and violates international law. And most of all, it violates human rights. I have prepared over the past 20 years of reflection on this matter as an advisor from time to time to the United States Department of Defense and to the intelligence community. In contemplation of the approach to ending World War, which the battle over the sovereignty of these sacred holy lands still is a remnant, as well as Ukraine, as well as the South Pacific. These are theaters of war that once existed in the 1930s, late 30s, throughout the first half of the 40s, but have existed since. These hotspots of World War II must come to a common peace, a peace of understanding the nature of a world war, a global war that affected all countries and all peoples and all races and all cultures and all citizens, all citizenships and all passports. We shall not enter a third world war on the watch of Joseph P. Firmage as your President and Commander-in-Chief. However, we will ensure the vitality of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. I will be proposing a solution to this paradox, it seems, but it goes like this, my friends. Jerusalem already is, in my mind, the world's central city. After all, the passions of our spiritual traditions are as close to anything that I can imagine that animates our lives and gives us hope and guides us in our daily decisions, our moral decisions of what's right and wrong. They all come from, in my opinion, our spiritual traditions first. And so it's no surprise that sacred region of Israel, Jerusalem itself, is a hotly contested place to control, to either include or exclude, to welcome or dismiss, to allow to inhabit or not. These are different questions, and my proposal is this. Let us make Jerusalem the world's first open city, truly open to all with passports that clear Israel's security protocols. For a time, for any passport to be able to visit this first world city, Jerusalem. Allow anybody from a nation that does not represent a terrorist risk to the rest of decent nations across our sacred planet. Let any national passport that clears both the nation and the person have an automatic visa to spend a week or two in the Holy Land. Israel's rights to exist as both a religion of passionate believers in monotheism, a religion that I've studied well, Judaism. It's also a city for the believers in the Islamic traditions. Muhammad and his descendants have left not only the thoughts that us Westerners have of the Arab world as perhaps excessively preoccupied with terrorism. It's not. They're human beings like we are, struggling to survive and thrive. The believers in the faiths and the traditions of Islam are mainly honorable people. Most of those who I've ever met in my various travels to the region have been among the most honorable, decent, family-loving, dedicated and devoted husbands and wives and grandfathers and grandmothers to their progeny, who they deeply love as much as we love our own children and our own parents. These terrorists certainly violate the third of the great Abrahamic traditions to which I subscribe, that any Christian person can advise that both sides of this conflict find a new solution, and I believe an open city to all religions and all people and all citizens of any nation and every nation that meets the test of the government of the state of Israel, which, from my perspective, shall last forever and will on my watch. So can Palestine, with a shared open city to the world of Jerusalem, and let the state of Israel, the government of Israel, of course, administer and control residency, the becoming of an Israeli citizen, and the citizenship responsibilities that come along with that. Israel and the Jewish people deserve their sacred home because it can be shared amongst all of us, of course. I thank you for your time this evening. The details about this ambitious proposal will be forthcoming in future presentations and discussions. A lot of work will be involved, but I believe with all my might that you agree that this is an excellent approach to end World War II and end World War with it. I thank you for your time this evening, my fellow citizens, brothers and sisters. May God bless you, your family, and may God bless the United States of America. Good night. Towards a lasting peace in the Middle East, tackling extremism to the ground. October 18th, 2023.
Firmage for president.